Welcome to Running Hot, Action Network's motorsports betting podcast. I'm your host, Nick Giffen, predictive analyst here at Action Network. And joining me for another season, my co-host, Stephen Young of Roto Grinders, better known as Stevie TPFL. And this week, we're talking bets for the NASCAR Cup Series Busch Light Clash at the Coliseum here on Running Hot. Last year, Ryan Blaney won the championship at Phoenix by finishing second to Ross Chastain. So Ryan Blaney will be our season champion as we head into 2024. But before we kick off the 2024 season, we've got the exhibition race. Yes, the Busch Light Clash at the Coliseum. Coliseum is a quarter-mile bull ring literally located inside the LA Coliseum. They pave it and put a track inside there, and they send these cars around for an exhibition race. So, Stevie, are you excited for another season? What are your thoughts from last season? And what are your thoughts heading into the Clash this weekend?
Yeah, I mean, glad to be back. We had a lot of fun doing the show last year. A very profitable show for everyone, and it was great to finally work together in a capacity where we got to chat each and every week. So excited to be back. Happy for the season. It's been a great off season, refreshing. So coming into the season refreshed, was at the track last week for the 24. And that's when I always it hits me like, hey, we're back. So, excited for the season. We got a lot of driver changes. We got Ford and Toyota going to new bodies. We got Chevy on the outside looking in. We got new short track packages. Just everything. So we'll talk about that next week when we talk about our season-long bets. But heading into this race, I'm excited because, one, we get cars on track, and we get our first look at the short track package, and we get our first look at Toyota and Ford with these new bodies.
Yeah, it's going to be certainly an interesting season. And you mentioned Toyota and Ford new bodies. We'll talk about that on our season preview episode next week because I'm sure that'll inform some of our season-long bets. But we do need to talk about the Clash. As I mentioned, quarter-mile track, short track, interesting format. So we got a whole bunch of stuff to break down here. So, Stevie, real quick for the Clash, can you explain a little bit about the format of this race?
Yeah, so this format's unique just in general when we're thinking NASCAR. But we have 4 heat races where each of the heat races are set by practice times of the final practice. So whoever has the fastest practice time in the final practice will start on the pole for heat race 1. And then it's like 5-9. So it's every 4 spots, and then we're going to qualify 5, and then 5 are going to miss the race. So, it's as simple as that. The top 5 in each heat are in, and then we're going to have a last chance qualifier race right before the Clash actually starts. So we're going to run 22 through 35 or 22 through 40, depending on how many cars show up at the Clash this weekend, or 36. And then the top 2 cars in the last chance qualifier get in. And it's not going to change too much for us on the betting side. That's more of a fantasy thing. But on the betting side, we're definitely going to be watching these heat races. They have provided fantastic information over the last 2 years when we've had the Clash at the Coliseum. So I think the best thing you can do this week is watch the heat races.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The heat races are going to be extremely important. Practice times have also correlated pretty strongly with driver performance. Last year, Martin Truex Jr. looked great on the long run, and lo and behold, who ended up winning the Clash overall? It was Martin Truex Jr. We could say similar about the year before. The drivers that looked good over the long run in practice, a lot of them tended to do well in the race. But these races can get a little crazy. You saw the first year, there was definitely in the heat races, some mayhem in the last chance qualifier. And then even in the race, there were some incidents, right? We had the Kyle Larson, Justin Haley incident the first year. And then last year, definitely some incidences. Plus, we had some mechanical issues last year in the race. So a lot of interesting things happened over the course of the 2 races. So even though it's, an exhibition race and there's only 150 laps or so in the main event, it's one of those things where things can happen. Things can happen in the heats, things can happen in the last chance qualifier, and things can happen in the race. So that's one thing to be cognizant of as well whether you're setting fantasy lineups or trying to bet this race. So when you are looking to bet this race, you mentioned, certainly look at the heats. We also mentioned looking at practice times. what else can we kind of do to try to handicap this race? Because we haven't seen cars on track this year yet at all.
I think we're going to be looking at our short flats. Who are our short flat drivers that we continue to target on these short flats each and every year? This is a short flat that we don't see. Like you mentioned, it's a quarter mile. There's no data outside of looking back at last year's race, but things change so much. They repave this every year, so it's going to be different. So it's not the same racetrack in general.
Right.
So I think looking at our short flat drivers, who was fast towards the end of the year last year, who was fast in the test. We tested with this new package, right at Phoenix, right after the season ended. So, that's what kind of we're going off of. If you're doing some early week betting, which we're going to talk about here on this show, that's what you're going off of. You're going off of, some stuff that you think you have some data advantage, your favorite thing. And there's not a lot of it this week.
Yeah, exactly. My favorite thing. I'm the data guy, and I love to comb through all the different little angles and find the different hidden trends. But you're right. There isn't a lot of data from this year, but we certainly can use, like you said, the shorter, flatter tracks. Those would be tracks like Martinsville last year, especially, would probably be the best comparable track because it is only a half mile. It is very flat, just like this track will be. So probably the best comparable track would be Martinsville. Then you have your Richmonds. You've got New Hampshire. You've got Phoenix, those kinds of ones. There may be more like secondary comps, I would say. They are shorter, flatter, but Richmond is 3/4 of a mile, a little more banked. It has that really high tire wear, which I don't think will be super applicable here necessarily. Phoenix is faster for sure. And then New Hampshire might be a decent comparable track as well. It's got that really flat kind of true oval, what we call layout, where it's 180-degree turns on either end. So definitely you could use some data from some of those tracks as well, and Martinsville. But like you said, I think the biggest factor this weekend is going to be how are these cars performing on track this weekend. So it's going to be absolutely imperative if you are betting this race that you watch the last chance and the heat races, because not just looking at the results from them, because sometimes the results can be misleading. We'll talk about a driver here where his result last year was misleading, but we want to see how do these cars actually look. Are they able to drive through traffic? Are they able to, once they get out front, maintain the lead? And so there's a lot of different factors that we'll need to use in the eye test in addition to the data. So Stevie, I guess, we're a betting show here. It's time to make some bets, right?
Yeah, and one other thing that I just want to mention, you kind of touched on it really quick there, but see who can pass. That's the biggest thing. Who can pass? Who can use that outside line and pass? If you can pass on the outside line in the heat races, you're going to be fast in the main event.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is our preview for the Busch Light Clash at the Coliseum. It is time to dive into some bets. We're going to do it a little different just for this race from what we did last year, because there isn't a ton of available bets out there in the market overall. So we're going to combine turns 1 and 2 this week, and then we're going to combine turns 3 and 4. And I think it's fitting because it's the Clash at the Coliseum. It's a quarter-mile track. 1 and 2 is basically one turn. 3 and 4 is basically one turn. So that's how we're going to do things this week. So, Stevie, we're taking the green flag, and it's time to dive into turn 1. All right, Stevie, start us off with your turns 1 and 2. Pick for the Clash.
Yeah, so I'm going to be very strict on outrights early in the week this week. And Ryan Preece at plus 2,200 is where I'm going to get started. He should have won this race last year. He was dominating this race late, had an electrical issue. So he ended up finishing like 7th, and he really wasn't a 7th place car. He started 16th, and he was one of the few drivers that was able to drive through the field. He had 22 quality passes, which was the second most behind Kyle Busch of drivers that finished inside the top 10. He has a lot of upside at 22-1. And again, looking at some early week odds to try to find some value, I think there's value in a guy that has built a career around racing short flats. And so I like Ryan Preece here at plus 2,200.
Yeah, I definitely got to agree with you there. And I mean, Ryan Preece, he's a guy that's been very interesting at this track type. I mean, you look last year, he led the most laps in the first Martinsville race. He's always been, really good at these shorter, flatter type tracks, and even some of the the banked ones as well. I know, for example, like he's been pretty solid at Bristol in the modified series. So Ryan Preece is definitely a guy you want to get at these shorter tracks. This is his style of racing. So definitely 22-1 there. Ryan Preece, some nice value. For my turns 1 and 2 pick, I'm going to go with his teammate. I'm going to take Chase Briscoe, but instead of the win, I'm going to take a top 3 finish for him at plus 725. Now, this is a guy who's, to me, very interesting. In both years here at the Coliseum, he finished second in his heat. And what that's going to do is it's going to put you inside that top 8, top 10 at, at worst, if you're finishing top 3 in your heat, let's say, I guess top 12 at worst, but that's putting you towards the front. So already if he is able to replicate what he did in the heats last year, he's going to have some great track position. And he's followed it up with some interesting races, let's put it that way. But this is a great track type for him. I mean, if we look at Martinsville, he has 4 straight top 10s at Martinsville. And they were both outside, I should say 5th or worse in 2022. But this past year in 2023, both were 5th or better. So he's a guy that's just getting stronger at this track type. And Stewart-Haas Racing overall, you mentioned Preece. Chase Briscoe has also been really good at this track type. We've seen in the past Kevin Harvick really good at this track type, but Eric Almirola really good at this track type, which, Harvick and Almirola are no longer with Stewart-Haas Racing, but overall as an organization, this is a great track type for Stewart-Haas Racing. So Chase Briscoe, he could potentially be up at the front near the whole race, just based off what he's done at this track type, and at specifically the 2 times we have raced here, what he has done. And he's an aggressive guy. We've seen him make some crazy moves late in races throughout his career. I wouldn't be surprised if he tries to bump his way to the lead, maybe even grab the win here, but certainly a top 3 at plus 725 for a guy who's potentially always near the front of races, especially with this style. I mean, even New Hampshire, we talked about that kind of as a secondary comp, maybe the best secondary comp aside from Martinsville. He had a top 10 finish last year as well. So Chase Briscoe always comes with speed at this track type. So I'm going to take him for a top 3. What do you think about that one?
Yeah, he was one of the fastest cars in practice last year, too. He was second in 10 lap average late in practice. And I think he was second or third in overall speed in practice. So had a really good car. Does the new body help? I mean, the new body is designed to help these cars, these Fords on short and intermediate tracks and take away some of their advantage on super speedways. So we're going to find out right away whether or not, because Briscoe and Preece are both 2 good drivers. And I mean, Josh Berry is another guy. Like, this is a track that's going to kind of suit Stewart-Haas this year, and we might see it right off the bat.
Yeah, exactly. So I think Stewart-Haas Racing, Ryan Preece, Chase Briscoe, that's where Stevie and I are kind of headed in turns 1 and 2. But before we head to turn 3 and 4, I want to remind y'all, Running Hot is proudly presented by BetMGM. Use bonus code ACTION when signing up to get $158 in bonus bets when you bet $5. For new users in Arizona, Colorado, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, and Wyoming. Terms and conditions apply. Must be 21 or older. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. All right, we've completed turns 1 and 2 here for the Clash episode of Running Hot. Now we got to dive into turns 3 and 4. All right, Stevie, 2 turns to go here on this little bull ring, quarter-mile bull ring, turns 3 and 4. We took Ford in turn 1 and 2. Are you going with Ford or are you going somewhere else in turns 3 and 4?
We're going to go to that new body Toyota with Bubba Wallace at 25-1 here. I was able to grab this at 30-1 when it opened up. It's 20-1 on some books now, but you can still get it at 25-1 on some books. So shop this around. Wallace had the best long run speed in practice here last year, and he followed it up with the best car. I really do think he had the best car in the Clash last year. He ranked 3rd in green flag speed during the race, was running top 3 almost the whole race. His average running position was 4.2, which was the 2nd best behind Martin Truex, who ended up winning this race. This line has moved. I like the upside here for Wallace. He got wrecked last year after he lost the lead and, wasn't able to keep going. So I think we saw Bubba's upside so many times last year. He has the upside, and he is a better driver than he was in this race last year. So I like Bubba Wallace here, 25-1. New body Toyota. They were the fastest at the Phoenix test with the new body and this new package. So I'm going to jump on it here and get Bubba Wallace at 25-1.
Yeah, I really like this pick. I mean, we're getting a guy who led a chunk of this race last year, who's shown tremendous upside, as you mentioned, has only improved as a driver. I mean, he's coming into his prime years and continues to improve every year. And, led a lot of races last year as well, not necessarily at this track type, but has been up front at this track type, near the front. So yeah, 30-1, 25-1. Why not take a flyer on him? And you mentioned, you got it 30-1 earlier. And now it's 25-1. One great tool we have at Action Network is our Bet Center, which is presented by BetMGM. If you go to actionnetwork.com/NASCAR, you can see our BetMGM Bet Center there. And it's a great tool. We have all the books listed out there. You can shop odds really easily. And that's actually going to be my turns 3 and 4 pick, is just some advice. Shop around, right? I don't want to make too many bets here before I see cars on track. So I want to wait for practice. I want to wait for qualifying as much as possible before I throw out too many bets here. But one thing, shop around, use the BetMGM Bet Center, the Bet Center presented by BetMGM, and also check your house rules for your various books. A lot of the major books out there, they have different house rules for this race. Some are more advantageous for the better. Some are more advantageous for the books. And that could matter. There it may be a case where I want to take a driver at a shorter price because the house rules are more advantageous than at a longer price. So there's all these things that we need to consider when we're betting NASCAR. And this doesn't just go for the Clash. This will go, week in, week out. Make sure we're shopping around, make sure we're looking at house rules. But I specifically wanted to mention house rules for this race because different books do have different house rules for this specific race because of the unique format, right? Some are taking any bets. Some will take bets after the last chance qualifier ends. And if your driver doesn't make it, it's void. So there's a lot of different scenarios out there, which is why I want to, make sure people are cognizant of what they're betting for this race, because it really could matter a lot when it comes to, a long-term ROI, making profitable decisions. Like I said, just because you can get a driver at 25-1, let's say, at one book, doesn't mean you should take him there. If at 22-1, you can get him with much more favorable rules, that'll make up that difference if the bet gets returned to you a high enough percentage of the time. So just a lot of stuff out there to keep in mind before we get to our victory lane pick. So yeah, I wanted to make sure I mentioned that, Stevie, because all that stuff is pretty important.
Oh, yeah, it's very important this week. It's not one of those races where we know, hey, the 36 charter cars are going to be racing in the race, and we don't have to worry about that kind of scenario. Like we talked about right at the beginning, this is a race where 22 cars start. So it is what it is, and, we got to take advantage of that.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. So, and I actually probably will be taking advantage of that for our victory lane pick. And one thing I do want to say this year, I will try to make it very clear when I have a lean or when I have an official pick, because a lot of times, when you and I record this podcast, we'll record it, and then by the time it's out, maybe the line is moved, etc. And we want to track all our bets in the Action Network app. And to do that, we want to track it when we bet it, because a lot of times when you and I will make the bet, then the line will move, or our followers will bet and they'll move the line. So a lot of moving pieces here, but I always try to make sure I make it clear when a bet is an official bet. So for me, because I forgot to do that, the Chase Briscoe top 3 bet is an official bet for me. I am going to put a half unit on that one. And also, my victory lane pick here, which is our combined victory lane pick that we do each week on Running Hot, is going to be an official bet for me as well. So, Stevie, why don't you unveil our victory lane pick?
Yeah, we're going to Denny Hamlin this week at 11-1 to win this race. And then for what it's worth, I have bet all 3 of these already that I have talked about. Like I said, I got Bubba at 30-1. Hamlin is one of the best flat track racers in the NASCAR Cup Series. He's had 51 wins, and 21 of those have come on flat tracks. He is a top 5 race car every time we go to this race type, just by pure talent and skill. So Hamlin was still ranked 4th in green flag speed last year, despite having spins and issues. He was one of the fastest cars. He was able to pass. My model's showing value here If he's good in practice, if he's good in the heat races, I think this moves closer to 6-1. He's the only driver besides Kyle Busch that I'm taking at like these shorter odds to start the week, because I do think both of those guys have the ability to actually win this race by pure skill. So I like Hamlin a lot. I know you're with me on this one. It was one of your picks, and I was like, hey, Nick, I'm on this with you. Let's move this to victory lane. So it's always great when we have those like picks where we're both on them very strongly and we're able to move it into victory lane. And this is one of them. So Denny Hamlin, 11-1. Now you tell the people why you like it.
Yeah, exactly. And this is one of those where I don't mind if you want to take the 11-1. You could take 10-1, and if he doesn't make the main event, the bet will get returned to you, and that's the route I'm going to go. But I actually don't mind the 11-1 where you don't get the bet returned to you, because he's probably making the event. Like, it's a really high chance he's making the event. But just in case something happens in this mayhem, I am taking the 10-1. I think I've calculated it out where there's enough value in terms of the chance of getting your bet returned. Because remember, this isn't a straight qualifying. This isn't just based off time. He could get spun out in his heat race and end up having to start way in the back for the last chance qualifier and just not make it to the front, so and miss out on the main event. So it's a little bit of insurance to take the 10-1, but I am going to take 10-1 on Denny Hamlin. And look, I mean, if we look at the last 4 shorter flat track races of the season, Denny Hamlin had a 112 driver rating, was one of the best drivers, and that includes Phoenix, where, of course, he was kind of just taking a back seat to Christopher Bell. So, you know, it's one of those spots where he probably wasn't giving 110% because all the focus was on other drivers in that Toyota stable. So if we remove that race, Denny Hamlin's average driver rating was even better. He led the most laps at the Martinsville playoff race, which of course is probably the best comparable track for the Clash, like we said. And you mentioned the Toyota, the new body. Reports are they look pretty good on this track type based off of off-season testing. The Toyotas do. So just another little reason to like Denny Hamlin here at 10 or 11-1 as our victory lane pick. So, all right, that'll do it for us. Thank you for listening to the Busch Light Clash at the Coliseum episode of Running Hot, Action Network's motorsports betting podcast. We'll be back this time next week. Even though there's no race next weekend, we're going to be back this time next week with our season preview episode where we'll take you through season-long bets and maybe even like we did last year, Stevie, some combo bets with that big football game that is coming up. So on behalf of my co-host, Stephen Young, thanks again for listening. We'll see you back here next week on Running Hot from Action Network.